100 Thieves have basically decided to run it back with their entire roster, and I think this is a very bad idea. And now, yes, one could say, well, Izento, like they won in summer, so why do you have a problem with it? Well, it's kind of like I would like to use the analogy of using the same F1 car next year. Even though, F1 has then created new rules about aerodynamics packages, about engine performance or braking, etc., you decide, and maybe they loosen it up. You decide that you just want to use the same F1 car for next year. Obviously, the problem is that now you aren't taking advantage of the new relaxed rules in order to improve your car. So to run it back with the same exact platform is a bad idea. So let's get into maybe why this is kind of a bad idea. Let's start with the entire lineup of 100T's roster. It's going to be Someday, Closer, Abadage, FBI, and Huhi, right? And there's a little caveat in there. But let's start with Someday. Someday looked really bad going, all the way through spring. And, well, actually, at the beginning of spring, he actually wasn't that bad. But going into summer and towards the end of summer, he looked pretty bad. He looked like he wasn't getting any advantages in the top lane. He was oftentimes losing a lot. He was losing matchups, which he probably shouldn't be losing that badly. And then fourth, he couldn't really play as weak side anymore. He just wasn't able to function as a weak side player. And so he had to get more resources, but the resources didn't actually mean that he could do anything with them and be, proactive on the map or maybe help his team out, etc. Right? So he was all in all just quite a liability for 100 Thieves. Now, if you look at, Someday as a player historically, I think you probably give him the benefit of the doubt and say, okay, you are actually a pretty legendary player, I guess, in his own right. So you still take the chance, I guess, and you try and run it back with him because there is a chance that he could come back up. I think he deserves that chance given that he is, a pretty legendary player in his own right. So I don't mind it that much. And so here comes in the secondary part, which is that they now have Tenacity as a sixth man, and it's because of this reason. It's because Tenacity is going to be the substitute top laner, and he is not going to be playing in Academy. He's just going to be a sixth man. And as you remember before, Reaper is famous for doing these six-man rosters, and I think if there is a person that's going to be able to pull it off, it is Reaper. But secondly, it's that, well, you can already see that 100 Thieves knows that Someday is not playing well. And so maybe this lights a fire under his ass, as people say. But I think more likely than not, we're just going to see Someday degrade over time. And the big thing is, and I hope this is going to be the case for this year, and I hope that the coaching staff actually knows that this is what Someday's problem is. And I feel like this is his problem. I don't know, maybe it's something different. But from the way that he's playing, I feel like that he isn't really comfortable requesting resources as a top laner. You could see oftentimes that he is playing weak side, and then he is often getting boned in the draft, although towards the end he wasn't getting boned in the draft, but he still was playing bad. But I think he needs to get more comfortable demanding more resources from the rest of his team and his jungler and coaching staff, etc. Because it seems like he is too often playing weak side, or that the team just isn't really corralling around him. Now, that's very difficult because obviously you have the core of Closer, FBI, and Huhi, right, that came over from Golden Guardians. So maybe he is actually this outsider on the team, and especially because he's the only, he's not the only Korean on the team, but you get my point, right? In that the fact that Huhi is more acclimated to American culture than maybe, say, Someday is. And Someday seems like a more shy guy, too. So, yes, I think this is should be his primary focus. within 2022 is I hope that he requests more resources, but also he just brushes up his play in order to demand those resources as well too, because otherwise his teammates aren't going to want to do that because they feel like it's just going to be a lost cause. So he needs to instill confidence within his teammates in order to demand those resources. So I hope to see that from him. But also, too, tenacity is probably a good choice anyways. If you guys don't know, tenacity was on 100 Thieves Academy. They won the the Proving Grounds, which is basically like Academy Worlds kind of. And so, yeah, 100 Thieves won Proving Grounds. And so that whole lineup basically got split apart and scattered to the winds to different teams. And 100 Thieves had kept tenacity. So I think they obviously have faith in this guy. He's clearly probably a good player. He has some bonker stats. I was looking it up. He's like 10-0 on Aatrox. It's fucking bananas. But clearly this guy has some talent, so maybe we will actually get to see him. Especially, I'm thinking what it's going to be is kind of like a sword and shield type of aspect, right? Of, you know, what happened previously with Cloud9, where it was Impact and what's that guy's name? You guys know who I'm talking about back in the day. Drop it down in the comments because I completely forgot. But it's going to be like that. It's going to be sword and shield, to where someday is probably going to be the shield and tenacity is going to be the sword, right? Because it looks like his champion pool, you know, it denotes that, I guess. So I think it's going to be pretty interesting. But I do have my concerns for that entire run back of just someday being in the lineup again. Now we go to jungle, which is Closer. Now, this one I actually don't mind. I think Closer is just a great jungler overall. He basically looked good the entire year for 2021. So I think this is a perfect player for this team in the fact that he is often the catalyst to be able to start things. Now, you know, that sounds flashy and to say that he's a catalyst or whatever, given that most junglers are the catalyst. Like, that's kind of how the role fucking works. But he truly is actually this catalyst, because you have an inactive top laner and you have a mid laner who is not really that aggressive. And then you have a bot lane that actually is pretty aggressive too. So, but usually traditionally, at least how the meta is now, you want your solo laners to actually be more of a catalyst rather than your bot laner. But anyways, yes, I think Closer ties this entire thing together in like a neat bow and you know, for the present. So I have no problems with him. I think he's a great jungler, and I think he'll actually do well coming into 2022 because it doesn't seem like he's one to shy away from like things that I guess are on the edge of innovation, or things to kind of improve and maybe that aren't completely dialed in as far as the meta is concerned, but then maybe become meta. So he's essentially has an open mind for the jungle, and that's exactly what you want to look for with someone who goes into like the spring split of a year. So I think this is a great choice, and I think he's a great jungler. Abbedagge, I was impressed how well he actually slotted in. Like, he like ran with it, right? So he's I think one of the best mid laners in terms of that adaptation that I've ever seen, in fact, of just adapting into a squad or a core and being able to just go with the flow. So like he is the best mid laner that I can think of, or one of the best players I can think of that has actually done this very well. That said, I think he must perform better than he did last year, because now he doesn't have the excuse of, you know, being the new guy in the squad and trying to shore up and catch up with all the rest of them in terms of how they want to play the game. I think he can have now more agency to be able to take things into his own hands and actually request for resources and dictate the pace of the game based upon the mid game or the mid lane. So I think on top of that too, overall, I thought mid lane was actually relatively weak last year. There wasn't really any standout mid laners other than Jizuke. as far as just mid lane strictly, right? We're not talking about like wider team play, but just mid lane specifically, or mid laners. There really wasn't any other standout mid laners that I could think of. Perks didn't live up to, his name. And then you had Jensen, who really didn't pop off anytime throughout the entire year, like other than playoffs. So really, I think Abadage is going to have more competition this year than last year. And so he must actually perform better to keep up with that pace of improvement within the league, because his previous performance isn't going to cut it. So I hope that he can do that, because otherwise 100 Thieves are going to slip back a notch. And then you have FBI and Huhi. I think they were the best duo last year, hands down. Generally, yeah, I just don't have a problem with this duo. I think Huhi is becoming a top tier support, which is fucking bonkers to say, right? I even said that last year. I think going into the year was that I thought Huhi was actually a pretty good support because of his Golden Guardians time. So yeah, I guess I'm gonna keep consistent with that to say that Huhi is he is a great support. In fact, I think just the ability or flexibility of his picks, as well as just his play style, and the fact that he can play this roaming style, or he can actually be lane dominant as well too. I think both of these things are really great. FBI, same thing. I think that he is an aggressive ADC. He needs to be where he needs to be in terms of his positioning and team fights and whatnot. I just think he was overall and around like the best ADC. I have no problem with having this bot lane, rejoin 100 Thieves and continue it for the next year. Now, let's get into the coaching staff, because I think this is where things get a little bit interesting in terms of that Mithy has joined 100 Thieves. Now, I think this is a great addition to the coaching staff, because if you think about Reaper's style specifically, he has always taken me as someone who is more emotional when it comes to his style of coaching, first of all, whenever you see him in videos and stuff, but also that his drafts seem to be emotional, or rather on the fly type scenarios. And I think with Mithy being able to kind of have more structure within that and more of a logical approach, this will actually round out Reaper's game. I think like this is the perfect assistant coach for Reaper specifically. And I think that's probably why Cloud9 didn't perform as well as they could, was because they didn't actually have that much of that emotional side. Because, you have Reignover, who's very methodical, you have Mithy, who's very methodical, and then, you have Max Waldo and Vigar, which are doing more strategical shit or more positional shit. So, like, there is no high emotion in any of that, really. So when it comes to this mixture of both of these two people, Mithy and Reaper, I think that's actually a good combination. And whoever actually picked up Mithy or thought of this idea to attach into the coaching staff, big ups to you. Big ups to Papa Smithy, probably. Like, this is a really good pick, and I could see exactly what they're thinking when it comes to picking up Mithy, because I think it does round out Reaper quite well. So with all of that said, I don't think this team is good enough to, I guess, improve at a scale which outpaces the potential of the rest of the other teams. You look at basically all the other top teams have kind of upgraded. C9, I think, based upon systems, right, and like coaching staff and also Korean players too. But although we don't know a whole lot about them or how well of, or how good of players they are, other than, this like T1 God ADC, and then Summit in the top lane, who is supposedly pretty good as well too, coming from Sandbox. So yeah, I think C9 has upgraded generally. And then you have Team Liquid, I think, have stayed relatively the same. Maybe they've lowered slightly, but I don't think they reached their peak potential. And then you have EG. I think they can just play a cleaner game, a easier style to play. I think people are going to underestimate that team quite a bit. Because they don't have to specifically play around this one play style, which was Jizuke. And then you have CLG and Immortals, which just generally have a better lineup. I'm not saying they're a stellar lineup or anything, but they could certainly maybe take a surprise game off of people. So every other team has basically upgraded. And this is the problem that I have with the Runback, essentially, is like to break it down into like car terms again. There is this racing like sanction called Formula D, which stands for Formula Drift. Very famous in the US. They tour around the entire US, and it's a drift competition, and you compete in different cities, and you're scored based upon, you know, like your driving style, but also your speed, your angle, how close a proximity that you can get to the car the other car as you're drifting around corners and stuff, how close you hit like the apex and whatnot. And point being, though, is that there is a famous engine that had been ran a lot within Formula D back in the day. This is like, you know, early 2010s, like 2015s, and it was the SR20. Now, bring on the fucking memes of the Fast and Furious SR20 quote. But yeah, you can get a fucking pretty good dime for an SR20 nowadays. But the point is that they're a 4-cylinder 2.0 liter. So it's very hard in order to get a maximum amount of horsepower out of them because they're such a small engine. And as such, when you increase horsepower on a small engine, you end up having to go through more and more extremes in order to extract that horsepower. Versus you could just get a Corvette engine, and already your base horsepower is, you know, like it's like 400 horsepower, right? Versus an SR20 starts at about 215. So you can already see there's a big jump, and it's, you know, way higher in liters, right? It's like a 5.0 liter. So really, like, people had figured out that, okay, well, let's go ahead and go to this different motor. And, you know, there were certain restrictions that, you know, had prevented you from having that motor, or it was like the overall weight of the car. But problem is that what 100 Thieves are doing is they're essentially running an SR20 when everyone else is running a Corvette engine. And the problem with it is that you're maxing out this little 2-liter engine, and that causes things to break more and more frequently because it's at its highest potential. Versus the Corvette engine, well, it's just, there's room to grow, there's room to improve it. So that's the point of the Runback, is the fact that there is very little room to grow, and the potential for the engine to break still, or to just be outpaced by the entire competition because they keep improving their engine of, you know, the 5.0 liter versus you're working with 2.0 liters, it's a very big difference. That's the main problem that I have with the Runback, and that's what I see with 100 Thieves, is that their max potential is actually limited. And so I think we're actually going to see this going into the later parts of the spring split, and especially heading into summer split. They might get a little kickoff into spring split because of their previous synergy and whatnot, and it's just the same fucking team. That's fine. But into the long run, I think they're actually going to run into a lot of snafus, and I don't actually see this team winning summer especially, but I don't even actually see them winning spring as well too. I think this is still a top 4 team, but I don't think they're top 1 or top 2 at all. And I think they're going to have to come up with some really clever shit in order to actually pull that off.